What's up, guys? Martin Reeder here, 2012 Olympian and creator of Off Ball. We got Reid Hall, strength and conditioning specialist for volleyball, and just an ex-athlete himself who knows a lot about what he's talking about. We're breaking down some movements here. Think about this as like student of the game stuff. We want to talk about things that no one really discusses, be it if you're a coach or an athlete. So let's break some things down. Reid, what do we got on the docket today?
So what we've clipped together is a bunch of highlights of these amazing volleyball attackers. So what we're looking at is the volleyball approach until we attack a ball and how it's one kinetic movement, how one movement affects the other, that affects the other. So we're going to start looking at the final two steps of the approach first and define some terminology and then show you how it affects your hips, how it affects where your shoulders, how it affects how you're attacking. So the first thing I want to show you here, so we're going to start with this middle player. That big step there, we call that the accelerator. So he's going to drive that left foot in the ground, and this step needs to be big, okay? The second step, this foot right here, so the right foot, that's your plant foot, and this is really important because it determines the angle of your hips, which determines how you attack. And that left foot right there, that's your break. So you're going to accelerate, plant, and then your break kind of transfers that energy to go up into the air.
Yeah, I love it. And if we were to draw a diagram of what this should look like, your energy, you're trying to accelerate laterally, so towards the net as fast as you possibly can, then you wind up having that plant step, which allows you to swing and rotate towards the setter, as Reid mentioned, and that break step is not actually about slowing you down. It's about transferring your forward momentum to vertical momentum, right, Reid? And the big part about this is your break step really controls how high you can jump and how hard or how far you float. Do you want to break that differentiation down a little bit about how important that break step is?
Yeah, the break steps absolutely crucial. What you'll find is those final two steps, your approach varies based on what position you play. But if you watch here, what's going to happen is you're really going to accelerate. So push, and they're going to accelerate. And then that break, what it does is it then it doesn't necessarily slow down your movement, but it transfers your energy to getting up so you can get up really, really high. The angle that your feet are facing when you have that break step also determines, are you going to jump more high or are you going to broad jump more? So you see how right here, both this plant and break foot are rotated out. That's going to allow you to transfer your energy to get up high versus really far. Because if we went back and you watch this spin serve, you're going to see his feet are facing way more forward. With the feet facing way more forward, you're going to cover way more ground, almost kind of like you're doing a broad jump. So that break foot, so your plant and your break foot, determines how open your angles are, but also affects how you jump as well.
So what we're talking about really is a toolbox that athletes and coaches should be aware of so that we can execute things differently. This is not a one-size-fits-all approach, right? This is, I'm a server, I'm a right side, I'm a middle, I'm a left side, I'm hitting a back row attack. Each one of these positions requires you to understand a few different angles, be it for the approach, be it for the actual footwork patterning, and then also how you want your hips to face based on where your feet are planted, right, Reid? We're talking about angles here.
Absolutely. And so I want you to show you now how this approach actually affects your actual arm swing and how you attack the ball. So what I want you to see, I'm going to back up to this last guy's approach here. Okay, so you see he's plant and his break. So this plant determines that his hips are going to be open. So when he jumps, his shoulders are facing the cross court. He could hammer this ball in the cross court, or he could swing back down the line, right? But say his shoulders, so say his plant and block foot were facing more forward, you know what would happen? His shoulders would be facing into 6, and he can no longer swing at these angles. He would now have to swing into more shoulder internal rotation, which is way more stress on the shoulder. So both the position of your feet, which you're going to see right here, so that accelerator, that plant, which opens up his hips, that break, and now this keeps his hips open, and because his hips are open, his torso is open, and now this allows him to swing at all kinds of different angles. But once again, if those feet were facing too far forward, it'd be hard for the setter to fire that ball in and for him to have more attacking angles. So once again, you see this middle player opening up and attacks, and he's got all kinds of different angles he can swing at. Hit it right. But obviously your setup, your preparation before you actually approach is super crucial, right? So as a left side, for me to hit those appropriate angles, me getting outside the court, right, is the first thing. So now I'm approaching, my shoulders are facing the cross court. Now when I kind of plant that foot and it's rotated out a little bit, it's going to allow my hips to be open. And now when I'm up, you can see I have all these different attacking angles, right? And now I want to show you this is different than a right side here. So let's go see a right side attack, right? So the right side's not getting so far outside of the court. They're approaching so that their shoulders are facing in between 5 and 6, right? You're also going to notice this step, his feet are facing way more forward, right? His shoulders are facing 5 and 6. When he gets up here, he's able to swing down the line or in the sharp cross court. So there's two things that are very important. Your preparation before you approach the ball, and then also making sure that your plant and your break foot are facing the appropriate direction so that we can have our hips open so that we can attack a ball really, really well.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's go one step further and talk a little bit more about the shoulder injury prevention stuff. You know, you alluded to coaches trying to fix athletes' arm swings without understanding how to adjust their hips and adjust the feet. What are we looking at from a biomechanical shoulder perspective when your feet and your hips aren't working for you? What's really happening, and how can we actually see that and identify that as an athlete or a coach?
Yeah. So a couple of things that I see is I see coaches often really working on improving an athlete's arm swing when the arm swing is part of the problem, but there's an issue further down the chain. And the issue is actually how they set up their feet. So you can do all the arm swing work in the world, but if you don't fix your feet, you can't fix the angle of your hips and your torso, and you cannot fix your arm swing, right? So say he was doing that exact same arm swing, that exact same setup, but his feet are facing really far forward. So you see they're not out that way, they're facing forward. Now his shoulders are going to be closed off, and he's going to have to swing into more shoulder internal rotation anywhere he swings in the cross court, and this is going to cause a lot more shoulder injuries. So as a coach, you want to look at the other components before the skill actually happens to determine what the root cause of the problem is, right? So in this situation, you work on so many arm swings to correct his arm swings, it's never going to fix because his feet are not set up properly. So it's a kinetic movement. One movement affects the other, which affects the other, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Something that I definitely noticed, be it playing and be it coaching, is if an athlete is incapable of opening themselves up towards the cross court, a way that they get around it to hit that angle is they really drop the left shoulder if they're a right-handed athlete, and then they kind of reach and then kink their mid body to get around it to allow that cross court angle to happen. So if you see an athlete really crunching sideways and dropping that opposite shoulder to reach the cross court, likely a simple adjustment of their approach angle and how they move into that final break step to then rotate and face cross court is in order. Any other tricks or any visuals that you can see that can help a coach or athlete identify that there's something to improve on, Reid?
There's a few things. So I think everyone wants to jump higher. And so I'm going to show you something with your approach. The most important part to actually allow an athlete to jump higher is that second last step. It needs to be powerful where you drive that foot in the ground. So right there, they need to drive that foot into the ground. So drive through that left foot. This step needs to be big. That step being big, accelerate your body, and then you can transition that into a big jump. But what you see a lot of, especially with the younger athletes, is that left foot won't be driven hard, and you see how big that step is. Their step will be about half that length, and then their approach is slow, and they can't attack the ball hard. Now, I'm going to give a caveat to this. So when I first actually started coaching volleyball, I was coaching, they were like 14-year-old girls. And what I was trying to do is increase the length that second last step and speed them up and jump higher. The problem is their approach looked good. I was able to speed them up, but their jump would look all disconnected. And the problem with those young athletes is a lot of them are too weak that when you speed up, it's that break foot is unable now to slow down the movement properly. So when they speed up their approach, it actually looks a little bit sloppier. So it's really, really important that if you're going to speed up an athlete or try to get them to jump higher, is make sure they have sufficient strength to support it, or it's kind of like trying to put a Porsche engine into a Honda Civic.
I actually had a lot of flexion in my upper body and then would come up and open my upper body. Whereas what we're seeing here, and we're seeing in higher level athletes, and the higher the vertical, the more you actually want to keep your upper body vertical within the approach. You're seeing how high his torso is. You know, I used to think that I had to fold forward, which is incorrect. So that would not only slow me down, but it was harder for me to track the ball with my eyes because my upper body was coming down. So can you talk about the biomechanics a little bit about trying to keep a proud and vertical chest and upper body throughout your approach?
It's important. This one's often a good one to look at video to actually see are you tall? Or are you falling forward? The problem is when your torso falls too far forward, it creates too long of a time for you to get off the ground, right? We have to get off the ground really quick. So by staying tall, you can keep your weight back a little bit and really drive through and jump, right? So torso falls too far forward, your jump is too slow, you're on the ground too long. Keeping your chest tall will really help complement getting off that ground really quick.
The court as possible. And you'll see this in a back row attack as well. Guys are floating way into the front row, having jumped behind the 3-meter line or having jumped behind the service line. So they're really looking to jump high but far. And you can see the reflection of the footwork and the hips as a result of that. And then you can obviously change the angle of your approach on that spin serve to open up your hips a little bit. But the back row attack and the service approach is different than the front row, which is also different from left side, middle, and right side. Let's get a little bit more into the signs of someone not being able to do this, Reid. And you touched upon a little bit of what you saw in the 14-year-old girls that you coached. But as a coach, what's a few signs that I would be looking for visually, or as an athlete? Hey, what can I notice about myself if I videotape myself that I'm not doing properly, or what's a tell showing that I'm having trouble executing a proper approach and jump?
For one, if you watch here, the first thing that you'll often see is that step is small and slow, right? That's our acceleration step. So that needs to be very fast, right? And then what you'll also see is these feet won't plant necessarily facing the right direction, right? So it's really 3 things that you want to make sure your athlete's approach angle is proper. So they're approaching on the right angle. That second last step is big and the feet are facing the right way. And that will help prepare you so the rest of the movement can be sound, right? If that's not there, the next part's going to be very, very tough. So once again, make sure you're approaching on the right angle, big second last step, and make sure your feet are facing the right direction.
Last minute rotation. So you'll see here, if you watch when he drives that right foot, you're going to see his toe really high, and then it actually opens towards the setter, and then his plant step or his block foot swings around and goes vertical. That was really challenging for someone who is goofy footed to then come around to and become a regular footed approach. So let's just talk about why is that important, that last little pivot of the hips when they're compressing to jump. That's what really sets up the arm swing, right, Reid?
Yeah, because when you actually pivot at those hips, it determines and allows your torso to be more open, right? And when your torso is more open, it allows you to bring more core and rotation in the ball. So it's not just happening at your shoulder, right? So that movement that Martin's talking about, where that swivel that allows us to get our hips open, those type of movements are what's going to help save your shoulder, right? And so once again, any part of that kinetic movement can break down and it'll affect all those other movements.
And inherently, the middle blocker has a shorter approach. You know, how can we make that that stride as we enter to then compress and jump? You know, what are some talking points that you have for a middle blocker, considering they have less space to not suffer a smaller vertical?
Yeah, the drive. So that second last step, so the accelerator, that drive there needs to be very powerful. Like you need to feel yourself driving that foot in the ground and creating distance. And then obviously the arm drive is crucial, right? So if you got a short approach, your arms add a ton to the jump. So the sequencing needs to be proper. So as you drive that left foot in the ground, the acceleration, that's when you're bringing your arms back, and then your arms lead your jump, right? So you don't want your hips to lead the jump. You want your arms. So you see, lead with the arms, lead the hips in your jump. And so that the poor timing of your arm drive, whether you're doing it too late or too early, will also have massive implications on how high you're going to jump within that shorter approach.
Nice. And then the last one, this one comes down to, setting. We, like I already alluded to this, but we all want the perfect set all the time, and I see too many athletes incapable of adjusting. So essentially, they have the same approach every single time, and if the set's in the window, great. If it's not, well, they don't know how to adjust it, and that's not the setter's fault. So as a hitter, you have so much control over your approach. You have to be able to adjust on the fly and make the set work. I absolutely despise it when the setter has to take accountability for all the bad sets. There really shouldn't be a bad set in your mind. It's on you to get there. So your angles that you get as a hitter all depend on your approach angle and your feet to keep this conversation moving. So all of these things are so important for an attacker to be able to consciously understand they have the control on. Any final points that you want to share here, Reid?
I think we hit it pretty well. And I think the overlying point that we kind of made is how one movement affects the other, and it can affect things further up the kinetic chain. So if you see one problem, look at the other components as well and see if there's issues there as well. But anyways, guys, we really appreciate you tuning in. This is Reid Hall and Martin Reeder. We're going to come back with you guys soon with some more great content. But as always, we appreciate you tuning in.
Yeah.
Good.
Love it, guys. And think about this as really learning about the game. Obviously, we're dealing with interesting times. We can't be on the court, but if you can use this time to become a student of the game, even more so than you were before, learn about how much control you have over your bodies, your minds, you're going to come out better for it.